So in Ephesians chapter 4, 26 and 27, it reads these words. I'm reading from the NIV. It says, "In your anger, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold." So there's three parts in there. Let's talk about the first part first. In your anger, do not sin. So lots of people think it's a sin to be angry. It's actually not. Nowhere in the Bible does it say don't be angry, and this verse included. This verse doesn't say do not be angry. It says in your anger or when you're angry, do not sin. So God got angry in the Old Testament against the Hebrews. Jesus got angry before he cleansed the temple. Anger is a God-given emotion, and it's part of the nature and character of God. And anger has its uses. It's a valuable, important emotion. And so it's not a sin to be angry, but you have to be careful with anger. Anger is like fire in a fireplace, right? When it's in the fireplace, it's a beautiful thing. It crackles, it's warm, it smells good. It's just wonderful. I love going to Cracker Barrel in the wintertime because they've got that big fireplace, and I love sitting close to the fireplace. It's just so warm and cozy. If that fire came out of that fireplace, it'd burn the Cracker Barrel down. And that's what anger is like, right? In its place, it's very valuable and powerful and good. But when you take it out of its place, it does a lot of damage and a lot of destruction. And that's what couples feel. So the verse here does not say don't be angry, because people will get angry in their relationships. But what it says is when you are angry, don't sin. So what does the sin look like? What kinds of sins happen in your relationship? Well, one is defensiveness. So back to Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the garden, and God confronted Adam. He said, "Adam, what have you done?" And Adam said, "It wasn't my fault. It was the woman's fault who you gave me." So at the same time, Adam blamed Eve and God. Not smart, right? So he blamed. Defensiveness is basically saying, it's not my fault. It's your fault that this thing happened. And then he goes to Eve and he says, "Eve, what have you done?" And she does the exact same thing. She said, "It was the serpent. The serpent made me do it." And so defensiveness is sinning in anger or in conflict because you're not taking any personal responsibility. There's lots of pride in that. People don't like to be called out on their inappropriate behavior. We all do it. We all don't like it. When my wife calls me out, I don't like it. And when I call her out, she doesn't like it. And so we all get defensive at times. So people react to conflict in different ways. Some people tend to stuff their feelings in marriages. So, when I have a couple in the office, we talk about stuffers. So stuffers don't like conflict. They try to avoid it because it makes them anxious. It feels like drama. It feels uncomfortable. And so if, let's say a man's a stuffer, a husband is a stuffer, and the husband, she does something, his wife does something that he doesn't like. Let's say she rolled his eyes at him. And he's kind of like, "Oh, I didn't like that. That didn't make me feel good." He's probably not going to say anything because he doesn't like conflict. So he stuffs it down. And then a week later, something else happens. And he doesn't like that, but he doesn't want to talk about it because he's trying to avoid conflict. So he stuffs it down. And stuffs. Eventually, it all comes out, either during an argument, and he starts unpacking everything in the stuffer tank, and his wife is like, "That was 2 weeks ago. Why are we talking about that right now?" And then he stuffs, and then he just explodes and lets it all out. So stuffers, the good thing about stuffers is that they tend to be polite and conflict avoidant and kind. That's a good thing. The bad thing about people that stuff their anger is that while they're stuffing, they're becoming resentful or passive aggressive in some ways. They pull away. They're quiet. They withhold affection. They harbor resentment. And then they're just unhappy. They have bad feelings towards the other person. If you think you're a stuffer, go ahead and raise your hand if you're a conflict avoider. Okay, all right, we got some stuffers in the room. So some people stuff their feelings. Some people let their feelings fly. I call them shouters. Stuffers and shouters, right? So stuffers don't have a tank to store their stuffed feelings in. they just blurt it out the moment that they're upset, right? And if you're not one of these people, you know somebody like this, or you're married to somebody like this. And so they let their feelings fly. But the problem is, while they're letting their feelings out, they can be mean or they can be aggressive. So the good thing about shouters is that they don't harbor resentment, they don't stuff their feelings inside. The bad thing about shouters is that they can be mean when they get their feelings out. So they can threaten divorce, they can name call, they can yell, they can blame, they can criticize. So they do a lot of damage. They let the fire out of the fireplace. My parents are both stuffers, and that happens sometimes in relationships. And so there wasn't very much arguing in the home that I grew up in, but there wasn't much love either. When two stuffers get married, they tend to avoid all the hard topics, and then they become more and more distant from each other. And that's what happened in my parents' marriage. They just grew out of love, and they did stay together, but they didn't really love each other. They didn't really enjoy each other. They harbored resentment. My dad would ignore my mom. My mom would confront my dad, but she would do it in a sneaky way. She would cut newspaper articles out of the newspaper and magazines, and she would tape them to the kitchen cabinet on the inside. So when he opens the cabinet, it's like, oh, 7 reasons to quit smoking. Oh, okay, whatever. Or like this one, reasons why you should hug your wife. Oh, okay, all right, whatever. And so I would find these articles, and I'm like, why is my mom doing this? But I grew up in a home where there wasn't a lot of arguing. Some people grew up in other kinds of homes, sometimes homes where there's a lot of arguing. So don't sin while you're angry. Be angry and sin not. That's the first part of the part of the passage here. So how do we do that? How do we be angry and sin not? This takes us to the second part. So don't let the sun go down while you are still angry. So resolve your anger as quickly as possible. So some people interpret this literally, and I think that's perfectly fine, to say resolve all your anger within 24 hours before you go to bed. And I think that's a great policy whenever possible, but it's not always possible, right? So I do infidelity work in my office quite a bit. That anger's not going away before you go to bed. That anger is going to last for a good long time. And if you've been through that, I'm sorry, because that's a very painful experience. And so resolve anger as soon as possible. Sometimes you may need to sleep on it and talk about it the next morning. Sometimes it may take a few days or a few weeks or a few months to get through that anger. But don't let anger sit in your relationship longer than it needs to, because like we talked about, it does a lot of damage. So resolve your conflict as quickly as possible. And wipe the slate clean. Sometimes I imagine when I see a couple and there's lots of anger and lots of resentment over the course of years, I imagine them standing on both sides of a stone wall. And every time that there's an unresolved hurt or anger, they put another boulder or block or stone on top of the wall, and the wall gets higher and higher and higher. And so in therapy, a lot of times what we have to do is try to drag that wall down, pull all the bricks off of it so you could see each other again. And so resolving conflict as quickly as possible. So here's tool number 1. And if you're taking notes, and I encourage you to write these things down because you're not going to remember them tomorrow. Tool number 1 is doing a check-in with each other. So a check-in is a how are we doing conversation. So a lot of couples do this once a week, maybe on a Sunday afternoon. And they sit down, they have a family talk or a family meeting, and they say, hey, how are we doing this week? What's something good that happened in our marriage? They do the high-low with their relationship. So what's one thing good that happened in our relationship this week? And so they talk about that for a minute. And then they say, what's something bad that happened in our relationship this week? And then they talk about that. And so here's a chance to invite somebody into a how are we conversation. And if there's any resentment, if there's any resolved anger, or if there are any issues, now's a great time to talk about it. And so don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. This is a great application of this passage, of being able to invite your spouse into that conversation and check in with each other. How are we doing? What's going on in our relationship? If there's anything that we need to talk about. So in that way, you can keep resentment from building up in your relationship and keep that wall from getting higher and higher. So doing check-ins, you can do it weekly, you can do it daily, you can do it as needed, but being able to check in with each other. If you're a stuffer, this is a great conversation because it gives you permission and a safe space to be able to talk to each other about the things that you're upset about. If you're a shouter, then this gives you pause, which is really good for a shouter because shouters don't like to pause. And when they say something impulsively, it usually comes out badly. But if they can sit on it for a little while until they've had a chance to cool down, now they are able to talk about it. So check in with each other, maybe once a week, maybe on a Sunday afternoon or as often as needed. And I would have this conversation with your spouse. Do you like this concept? And can we apply this to our marriages? So the second repair that I want to talk about, how to resolve conflict in your relationship, is something called doing repairs. And a repair is something that you do or say in your relationship to resolve conflict quickly. The reason why repairs work is because they make the other person feel loved again in the relationship. So what gets you into an argument is feeling unloved in some way. If you boil it right down to the reason why couples argue and get angry and defensive and do all these negative things is because they feel unloved in some way, right? So let's say, for example, Sanders and Val were struggling with something. It's their wedding. No, it never happened, right? It's their wedding anniversary. Sanders has forgotten. So he forgot. Val is so excited. She's got her present ready. It's first thing in the morning. She's just woken up. She goes, "Here's your anniversary present." And he's like, "Oh, that was today, wasn't it?" Okay, now she's hurt, right? Because she feels unloved because he forgot the wedding anniversary. So, and she would never do this either. But let's say she got mean about it. She's angry. She lashes out. Now, and then he gets defensive, and then she fires back. Now, all of a sudden, they're in an argument. The reason why they feel that way is because they feel unloved in some way. She feels unloved because he forgot their anniversary. He feels unloved because she's lashing out at him in anger. So what gets a couple into an argument is feeling unloved in some way. What doesn't work is defensiveness, arguing what actually happened, arguing your intentions, all these things. Those things don't work. They just leave the person in this place of feeling unloved. What gets you out of the argument again is doing or saying something that makes you feel loved again. And so that's what repairs do. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of repairs. You can write them all down. And then this afternoon when you guys go to Mexican for lunch after church, because that's what everyone does, go get some tacos after church, you can talk about it. Talk about the 4 repairs and say, which ones do you like, which ones do you not like? Because they won't all work. Sometimes this one or that one works, sometimes they don't. It depends on the person who you're with and the person that you're married to. The concept of repairs, I should let you know, this is a concept that was created by a guy named John Gottman. He is a marriage researcher. Probably many of you have read some of his books or at least heard of him. And so he came up with this concept. So 4 repairs. And let me walk you through the 4, and then you can write them down and talk about them with your partner later. So affection is number 1. And again, repairs are a little bit like love languages. Some will work, some will don't work. Some people, if they're mad, they don't want to be touched. I'm mad, don't touch me, right? A lot of times women will have this reaction, don't give me a hug when I'm mad. Don't try to hold my hand when I'm mad, don't touch me. But some people, if they're upset, affection goes a long way. I remember seeing this one couple in my office. He was actually a therapist also. And he wanted to therapize his wife. You know, he was always like trying to give her therapy, which wives don't really like that if you're a therapist. And so we had to talk through that. But she had a lot of trauma in her background. And when she got upset, she would lash out. And then they would just sit in this place. He would try to do the inappropriate things that he did to resolve conflict, and she would get angry and fire back. And so we talked about repairs, and she said, it would mean so much to me if he would reach out and hold my hand. It was hard to get him to do it, believe it or not, but eventually he did start doing it. So if we are working through an issue in the office, I'd be like, hold her hand. And eventually he would like reach out and grab her hand, and she would just calm right down. Or put his hand on her back, or put his hand on her leg. And there's something about physical touch that just makes you feel so loved, so safe, so secure. it just smooths everything over and makes you feel loved again. So affection for some people works really, really well in helping them be able to resolve conflict. Okay, that's number one. Number two, this one you got to be careful with, is humor. Now, I like to try to make my wife laugh if she's angry. Yeah, see the faces. Most of the time, that doesn't work out well. And I don't know why I keep doing it. It's like pressing a bruise. Ow, ow. You just keep touching it over and over again. I don't know why I do it. I just try to do it. But she doesn't like humor. Normally, if I try to make her laugh when she's angry, she just stares at me and says, "You're not funny." So, but one time, she used humor on me, at least one time. We were married maybe a year and a half. We were in this little apartment with this little galley kitchen. And we were arguing about something. I don't remember what we were arguing about, but she grabs a bag of marshmallows out of the pantry, and she starts whipping marshmallows at me while we're arguing, not in an angry way, but in a I'm trying to make you laugh way. And by the second or third marshmallow, I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she was laughing while she was doing it. And then I started laughing, and then I was like, "What kind of Jedi mind trick did you just do to me?" Because all of a sudden I wasn't mad anymore. And I'm like, how did my mood go from being mad at you to not being mad anymore? And now I'm happy and feel loved and connected. And it was this amazing moment. And so that's what humor can be sometimes. It's a way of lightening the mood and making the other person feel loved and being reconnected again. So sometimes humor can work really, really well. And then again, sometimes not. So affection, humor. Number 3 is confession. Now, number 3 and 4 are the big guns, right? A confession is super powerful in a relationship. In James 5:16, it says, "If you confess your sins one to another, you will be healed." And I've seen this passage hold true over and over and over again. There's something amazing about confession that creates so much healing in a relationship, not just a married relationship, but any relationship. And it so rarely happens. Almost never when somebody confronts you or you confront somebody else do you say, "You know what, you're right. I'm guilty of that. That was wrong." But when it does happen, it just goes over really, really well. Confession, it requires humility. All repairs require humility. And the problem with anger and conflict is your pride kicks in, and you want the person to apologize to you. You don't want to listen to them. You want them to listen to you. And so confession is a way of bringing humility into the relationship and can be a very, very powerful thing. And so when you confess to each other, you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm probably guilty of something here, because in a conflict, almost always both people are guilty of something. And then you say to yourself, what am I guilty of? What am I responsible for? And then you say that out loud. You say, you know what? I was being selfish. Or you know what? I was being sarcastic. Or you know what? I was being rude. And then the walls just start coming down. At that point, the fight is almost over. And also, whoever you're having that conversation with is probably also going to respond in kind. They're probably going to say, they're going to match your energy. They're going to say, you know what, I'm guilty too. I shouldn't have been defensive, or I shouldn't have been so angry, or I overreacted. And so confession is a really, really powerful thing. I used to do for a long time marriage intensive weekends, and I would take 4 or 5 couples to WinShape, which is a marriage retreat center in Rome, Georgia. And we would spend 3 days with these couples who were on the verge of divorce. And about 2/3 into the weekend, we would do a confession exercise. I would send them away by themselves, not with their spouse, but just by themselves, for an hour or more, and with a pad of paper, and say, just pray. Pray that God will reveal to you the ways that you've hurt your spouse. And so they went away and they wrote down a list, and then I would have them read their list to their spouse in front of the group. Now, by this time, the group's gotten really, really close because they've unpacked all of their trauma and marriage and childhood and all these things. And so it wasn't overly embarrassing to be able to do that. And when they did that, the tears just flowed and the walls came down and people got so specific. And they said things like, when we were married 2 years and I was really mad and I broke your grandma's dishes, I still feel horrible about that to this day. And she was like, I can't believe you remembered that. That means so much to hear you say that. And so when people get honest and confess and in humility say, that was wrong. I am so sorry. I hope you can forgive me for that. It is a truly powerful thing. So confession is number 3. The last one is empathy. And empathy doesn't necessarily say I was wrong, but empathy says I get you. I hear you, I see your feelings, I know that you're feeling that, and it gives somebody permission to feel the way that they feel. Some people in marriage, they almost never get this, and that's why it becomes one of their repair languages, is because they want so badly for their feelings to be understood and for their feelings to be accepted. If you reject their feelings, people feel rejected. If you accept their feelings and give them permission to feel the way that they feel, they love that. The interesting thing about empathy is that you can use this even if you haven't actually done anything wrong. If I'm on my way home from the office and my wife says to me, "Can you please hurry home? I'm having dinner with a girlfriend tonight and she's only in town, once a year and I don't want to be late. So can you please get home as soon as possible?" No problem, I'll be home. And then something bad happens. There's a wreck or there's a power line down on the highway, and I can't get home quick. And so I'm home 20 minutes later than I was planning on being home. She might be frustrated. I haven't done anything wrong. She might even be frustrated with me, or at least the situation. If I get defensive, well, I couldn't get home quicker than I did, then we're probably having an argument. But empathy says, I totally get why you're frustrated right now. You want to see your girlfriend, you're anxious to get out of here, I'll take care of everything here, just go. And so empathy makes a person feel understood and their feelings validated and makes them feel loved. I'm going to have the band come up, and I'm going to talk about, for just a couple more minutes, the last part of this verse. So we talked about, in your anger, do not sin. And then we talked about the second part of the verse, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. And now we're going to talk about the last part of this verse, don't give the devil a foothold. So what happens when you don't resolve your anger quickly? Anger builds up, resentment happens in your relationship, and it wreaks a lot of havoc. There's resentment, there's loss of love, loss of connection, maybe infidelity, maybe divorce. And so I see a lot of unhappy couples in my office. And I see divorced people who are dealing with a lot of pain because of the failure of their relationship. And the reason why is usually because of this concept. It's the hurts, it's the anger, it's the unresolved trauma. Some years ago, there was a crime spree in our neighborhood. And what was happening was people were leaving their cars unlocked at nighttime in their driveway. And so the thieves every few nights would sneak into our neighborhood at about 2 or 3 in the morning, and they would start trying to open car doors. And they weren't going to break in if it was locked, but if it was unlocked, they would open the door and they would grab whatever's inside. They stole iPads, they stole computers, they stole different things. And so in our neighborhood, the Facebook message went out and they were like, please lock your car doors. Thieves are coming into our neighborhood and they're trying to steal from us. And we don't want thieves coming into our neighborhood. We want to keep the enemy out. And so eventually people started locking their doors and the thieves stopped coming. In Ephesians 4:27, it says, don't give the devil a foothold. Satan wants access to your relationship by getting a foothold. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. 1 Peter 5:8 says, Satan is like a roaring lion seeking somebody to devour. So be sober, be vigilant, so that you keep the enemy out. We don't want the enemy in our relationships. We don't want him to create resentment and contempt and divorce and infidelity. We want to keep him out of our relationship. And so the way that you do that is you lock your doors. You don't give him access to your relationship. When you have an issue, you talk about it, you check in, you repair it, and then you lock your door and push him out. And so my prayer for you guys this morning is, in your relationships, if you're married, or in your future relationships, if you're not yet married, that you keep your doors locked and you keep the enemy out of your relationship. Let me close this in a word of prayer. Father, we trust you that Your word will not come back void. It's quick and powerful. And we just ask you to bless these words and to bless the message here this morning, the tools that you give us. And we just trust you that you will bear fruit out of this conversation this morning. I pray that couples will have a good conversation later today about the things that we talked about. I pray that if they need help, they will get the help that they need. And I pray that you will be glorified through the richness of their relationships and the benefit that has on their children, future generations, and society as a whole, and on this church. Thank you for this time and the words this morning, and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.